Welcome to the Atlantean Healing Part 1 Masterclass, presented by Pleiadian Institute. Only one who devotes oneself to a cause with their whole strength and soul can be a true master. For this reason, mastery demands all of a person. Atlantis has captured the hearts and minds of humans since it was first presented in Plato's writings. Some believe the existence of Atlantis was fact. Others believe it was a fictional allegory written by Plato to describe the fall of an ideal city-state. Our purpose today is not to prove or question the reality of Atlantis. Instead, we'll examine the research about this prehistoric network of island cities. We'll explore what we've learned about the healing practices of our earliest ancestors, the ways they harnessed energy, connected to spirit, and used crystals for healing, the importance of our sources. We bring together 3 key sources in our exploration of Atlantean healing practices: Plato, Edgar Cayce, and Diane Cooper. Plato's works were written about the time that the first records of the Bible were recorded. Edgar Cayce has produced one of the most prolific databases of past life regression records dating back to the time of Atlantis, and Diane Cooper is one of the most well-known channelers of Atlantean healing wisdom currently alive. Let's begin through looking through the eyes of Edgar Cayce at Atlantis. Edgar Cayce was born in the United States and lived between the years of 1877 and 1945. He's been called the sleeping prophet, the father of holistic medicine, and the most documented psychic of the 20th century. Cayce recorded over 14,000 sessions with more than 6,000 people. He used clairvoyant gifts to diagnose illness and assisted people in revealing lives lived in the past for the purpose of spiritual healing. In his 14,000 recordings, which were telepathic and clairvoyant in nature and were collected from 6,000 people over a 43-year period between 1900 and 1943, he brought people into a trance state. These people living in geographically diverse areas with no knowledge of one another gave strikingly similar accounts of Atlantis. Their readings are documented in a database within the Association for Research and Enlightenment, ARE, the nonprofit founded by Cayce in 1931. The majority of Edgar Cayce's readings deal with holistic health and the treatment of illness. In their entirety, they discuss about 10,000 different topics. This can be narrowed down into the following 5 categories: health-related information, philosophy and reincarnation, dreams and dream interpretation, ESP and psychic phenomena, spiritual growth, meditation, and prayer. Cayce, a devout Christian and Sunday school teacher, said that his readings came from his subconscious mind, exploring the dream realm, where he said all minds were timelessly connected. Here we have Cayce's own words about why connecting to our Atlantean ancestors is important. He says, "Then if we are to accept such as being a fact or fiction, may truly depend upon what value to the human family knowledge concerning such a people's would be in the affairs of individuals today. What contribution would information to the minds of individuals as to knowing or understanding the better or closer relations to the creative forces? Or to put it another manner, what would information of that nature mean to my soul today?" This was one of many dialogues that he had in which he outlined the importance not of learning information about Atlantis for information's sake, but instead to facilitate the healing of our minds, our bodies, and our souls. The second most popular Edgar Cayce reading type were the life readings. He gave approximately 2,000 of these. They're second in his volume to health readings, which comprised about 2/3 of the total of his readings. In Cayce's life readings, an individual was told about 3 to 5 past lives, with emphasis on connecting with ideals from past lives and seeking a continuity from the past into the present, connecting to latent gifts and talents that would be helpful to explore again in the current life, exploring pitfalls from previous lives, basically destructive behaviors and patterns to be cautious about in the current life, as well as relationships from the past life that are current in the present. For example, past lives with current family members, partners, or work colleagues. Here, we see Cayce's words again, in which he explains in greater depth the importance of past life regression in connecting to the parts of us that have lived here on Earth before. He says, "Be it true that there is the fact of reincarnation, and that souls that once occupied such an environment are entering the Earth's sphere and inhabiting individuals in the present, is it any wonder that, if they made such alterations in the affairs of the Earth in their day as to bring destruction upon themselves, if they're entering now, they might make many changes in the affairs of peoples and individuals in the present?" And this statement is key to his philosophy regarding past life regression and working with past lives connected to Atlantis. There has to be value that this information is coming up, and that is what is important to focus upon. The importance of spirit in healing. Cayce's writings on Atlantis are grounded in his belief in Christ. He describes Atlantis as the second race of Earth, who came out of the Christ light. Their thoughts were so out of alignment with God's truth that the energy of these thoughts caused the destruction of their civilization. So, therefore, our job is not to ask, how much information can I gather? Instead, it's to ask, what does this information mean to my soul today? Importance of the sun. The rays of light that emanate through the great central sun can be described as high vibrational vortices of divine light, emanating from the cosmic heart of God. As we bring our attention to each ray, we align with its vibrational frequency. The Atlanteans were aware of the importance of working in meditation with the 7 sacred rays of light. They innately understood that within the light there was a frequency that acted like fuel for their lives. Through the rays of light, sacred geometric forms act like giant receivers and transmitters of particles of light. This is a process that transcends time and space. This means that the frequencies of the rays are omnipresent. There's never a time that we cannot align with their frequency when using the proper tools. In Edgar Cayce's words, he describes the Atlanteans' connections to the sun's rays, and he says, "The nature's forces may be turned into even the forces of that makes life, as given from the sun rays to those elements that make for or find corresponding reaction in their application of the same or reflection of the same to the rays itself, or a different or changed form of storage of force, as called electrical in the present." So he explains that the Atlanteans understood the electrical charges that radiated through the rays of the sun They stored them for the future, and they tapped into them in the present moment as a source of power. When we bring our attention over and over again to the spiritual qualities of the rays of light, we transform lower thought forms and align more fully with the light of our Creator. The Atlanteans practiced a pure and wholehearted devotion to the rays of the sun. They would transform electrically due to a greater capacity to be fully present. They opened to spirit just by encountering the rays. The rays of sun were harnessed in basic practices for healing, for power, for energy, and for communication. The importance of our Earth. Atlantis through the eyes of Plato. What we know about the location of Atlantis comes from the writings of Plato, an ancient Greek philosopher whose writings form the foundation of all philosophers. Plato described Atlantis as an ancient landmass, situated past the Pillars of Hercules, which divided the known and unknown worlds. Here is a timeline that shows Plato's birth relative to the emergence of Atlantis. He was first born about 429 BCE. He lived about 300 years before Jesus. So you see here the civilization of Atlantis that stretched between 250,000 BC and 10,000 BC. Then, about 9,500 years later, Plato was born. This was about the same time that the Torah, which is the original Jewish scripture, was canonized. This is also the source of the Old Testament of the Bible. So it is during this time, 10,000 years after the fall of Atlantis, that we see these writings emerge that give us guidance about how to live a life more in alignment with the ideals of man and with the light of God. Plato's first book was written in 380, and Critias and Timaeus, which is where we learn about Atlantis, was written in 360. Between 4 and 6 BC is when Jesus was born, and what we now know as the Bible was finally canonized about 400 years after that. So Plato's insights and words come at a very pivotal time in our civilization. It was a deep awareness of the failings of the civilization that preceded them that birthed this writing that came out of this period. The Pillars of Hercules, which marked the entrance to the unknown world, are large stones that mark the end of the Strait of Gibraltar, a body of water that divides Europe from Africa. Here you can see an aerial view of the Mediterranean Sea, the Strait of Gibraltar here pouring out into the Atlantic Ocean. Here is the European Pillar of Hercules. This is the giant rock landmass on the side of the Strait of Gibraltar in which Europe lies. This rock is known as the Rock of Gibraltar. Plato's writings on Atlantis are controversial, and there are many today that dismiss his writings. This blogger who wrote an article for National Geographic on the location of Atlantis describes Plato's writings on Atlantis as almost certainly false. And this attitude is one that we see regularly in mainstream media, an outright dismissal that Atlantis could have ever possibly existed. Yet, over the years, we have seen thousands and thousands of people seek to find Atlantis. This attitude that Atlantis is a dangerous myth is one that is repeated in mainstream media all over the world. But what we also see is scientists looking off the coast of Spain, underneath Europe, for the lost city of Atlantis. There are thousands and thousands of articles of people who are intent on finding the physical ruins of Atlantis. Even as far back as 1979, we see Soviet scientists saying that an ocean site located may be the original home of Atlantis. So it's important to take a step back before we look at the healing practices of Atlantis, at the way that this information could be perceived by mainstream media today. And when we take that step back, we see that these concepts that were presented by Plato thousands of years ago are still alive in the consciousness of people today for a reason. There is a reason that people are out, thousands and thousands of scientists are out in the ocean looking for Atlantis, and it is more than just a curiosity, but I think we have to believe that it is something that we as humans feel in our hearts that we have a connection to. And it's Plato's words that really brought that connection alive. The original story of the lost island of Atlantis comes to us from two Socratic dialogues called Timaeus and Critias, both written around 360 BC by Plato. According to the dialogues, Socrates asked three men to meet him on this day. He asked the men to tell him stories about how ancient Athens interacted with other states. It begins with a story describing the creation of the universe, from its very beginning to the coming of man. Timaeus introduces the idea of a creator god and speculates on the structure and composition of the physical world. Critias, the second part of Plato's dialogue, comprises an account of the rise and fall of Atlantis, an ancient, mighty, and prosperous empire ruled by the descendants of Poseidon, which ultimately sank into the sea. Atlantis is often shown as a utopian civilization that existed in a mythical land. The dialogues of Plato were prepared as a festival speech in honor of the goddess Athena. They describe a time that existed in between the reality we know today and the mythical reality that once existed upon Earth. Plato's story is preceded by one of the myths of the god Helios of the Greek pantheon. The Atlantis story describes the story of a place on Earth that was inhabited by the first humans to incarnate through the gods and create a civilization. You can use the word mythical to describe the lands occupied by our ancestors. Myths remind us of times in which humans lived with gods on Earth. Civilizations like Atlantis do not exist to be dug up. They exist to fuel our minds, like myths, to inspire us to rise up into our greatness, to embody the light within us to its fullest potential, and to activate the power of the god and goddess within. The founders of Atlantis were half god and half human. They created a utopian civilization and became a great naval power. Atlantis included concentric rings of alternating water and land. They used all natural resources available to them for survival and healing. They dug out of the earth whatever was to be found there. Roots, herbs, woods, or essences distilled from fruit and flower, also the fruit, the dry sort given for nourishment, and any other type to be used for food. The Atlanteans used everything they had. Drinks, meats, ointments, a good store of chestnuts. They ate and used their resources both for healing and for pleasure. All these that sacred island which then beheld the light of the sun, brought forth fair and wondrous and in abundance. Plato's words describe a civilization that is very close to a Garden of Eden. They had fountains, one of cold and another of hot water. They trusted in the excellence of the waters. The water was always flowing, and they used the water both for pleasure and healing. They constructed buildings and planted suitable trees. They made cisterns, outdoor baths, some open to the heavens, and others roofed over, to be used in winter as warm baths. There were king's baths, baths of private persons, which were kept apart, and there were separate baths for women, horses, and cattle. They adorned the baths as much as was suitable, and there were many temples built and dedicated to many gods, also gardens and places of exercise. The Atlanteans found healing in the earth, in the way they revered the elements of the earth, and in the way they took care of what they had. Their greatest power was activated within a deep presence with the natural elements that surrounded them. The destruction of Atlantis took thousands of years and happened in stages. The date of the first destruction is 7,500 years before the final destruction in 10,000 BC. During that time, Cayce describes the downfall of Atlantis as beginning in the minds of the people. He says, polluting themselves with those mixtures that brought contempt, hatred, bloodshed, and those that build for desires of self without respects of others' freedom, others' wishes. He said there began, then in the latter portion of this period of development, dissenting and division among the people of the land. So how is what we know about Atlantean civilization here to serve us today? Well, it's here to remind us, first of all, that we each in our respective sphere carry some portion of these original blessings. We were born through the same light, onto the same earth as the Atlanteans. We have many of the same wants and desires. We both deeply seek to enjoy life in our human body. We have the same potential for spiritual connection and to develop the gifts of spirit that the consciousness of the Atlanteans are here to teach us. When thoughts are aligned with the channels of these blessings with singular focus, the creative forces then manifest through our attention. This is a reminder that when we dwell in truth in our thoughts, when our actions are aligned with a pure heart in service to an infinite power, the light at the center of all that is provides infinite resources. The Atlanteans remind us that where we place our attention creates our reality, and that we have the capacity as humans for great destruction and for great healing, depending upon where we focus our thoughts. The importance of the body. In Edgar Cayce's words, he describes that through the sources of creation, through the rays of light, of the creative forces that brought into being that as was made, the body was brought into being as the last of the creations. The Atlanteans honored their bodies as temples of the highest living light. As to their forms in the physical sense, these were much rather of the nature of thought forms. During the over 100,000 year period that the Atlanteans lived, they inhabited different types of physical bodies. At first, they were more aligned with a field of consciousness and less so with their physical body. They were able to push out of themselves in that direction as which its development took shape in thought, much in the way and manner as the amoeba would in the waters of a stagnant bay or lake in the present. So they were able to transpose their physical bodies, to transform themselves through singular focus in their thought, in their mental bodies. The abilities to transpose or to build up the elements about them, to transpose bodily from one portion of the universe to another, was the gift of the Atlanteans. They understood that through the breaking up of the atomic forces, they produced an impelling force of transposition. It allowed them to travel, to lift large weights, and to change both the faces and forces of nature itself. In other words, they understood through a singular focus how to both manipulate and transform energy at an atomic level. The importance of energy. We understand then that the Atlanteans used elemental forces with the union of two that respond to these vibrations. They created a transformed form that emitted faster vibrations. They were deeply present, and through that presence, they only needed to come into contact with another, whether that be another being or person, whether that be another thought form, whether that be an element of nature, and through coming into union with another, through the union of two, they were able to come into vibrational harmony and transform themselves into a new form. The principles that make atomic forces within the active principles of all nature are one of the elemental bases from which life is in its essence. The Atlanteans understood this. They understood that these forces gave off what was good always, unless they were abused. Here, the words of Edgar Cayce remind us that the Atlanteans had a mastery of energy on an atomic level. Now we look through the lens of Diane Cooper at the healing practices of the Atlanteans. Healing ceremonies took place within stone circles created on ley lines. The circles became sound chambers where the priests would tone and chant. Participants would charge their bodies with energy from the earth and walk in designated paths following the meridians of the earth home. This allowed them magnetically to absorb and amplify the earth's energy and bring it home with them. They aligned the stone circles with a star system so that the wisdom could be drawn down to them. They aligned their stones with the Pleiades to bring in healing energy, or with Sirius to bring in spiritual technology. They bathed in the high-frequency light from the star systems and absorbed it into their consciousness. These stone circles were built above the point where underground streams crossed, so that the power of the ceremony and the wisdom of the cosmos passed through the ring of people into the water and was carried around Atlantis. Ceremonies happened through this system of waterways. This meant that the water was not only clear and pure, it was also constantly blessed and filled with a high-frequency energy, so that when people drank it, swam, or bathed in it, they received continuous blessings. An energetic dome also surrounded Atlantis, a vast umbrella of pure, high-frequency energy that created a biosphere within which elements and atmosphere could be controlled. The energy dome also acted as a protective bubble. During the final years of its empire, the children of the Law of One, a group of pure souls who wanted the teachings of Atlantis to survive, created an etheric city. This etheric city was a city of energy, built beneath the ground of Atlantis to preserve the knowledge of this sacred civilization. This etheric city is known as the Halls of Amenti. It is only able to be accessed with those who are aligned with its frequency, who are pure of heart, and have pure intentions for entry. The importance of minerals of the earth. Throughout Atlantis, crystals played a major part in the everyday lives of the people. Atlanteans worked with a giant crystal known as the Great Crystal and a network of smaller crystals for healing and as energy sources. In the beginning, the Great Crystal generated enough energy to sustain life. A network of crystal pyramids were programmed to draw energy from the Great Crystal. There were also etheric crystal pyramids that were located in the etheric field that surrounded Atlantis. The etheric crystal network created a grid of crystalline magnetic energy. This high-frequency energy flowed down into the crystal pyramids on Earth. The Great Crystal and the crystal pyramids were conduits of energy from the Earth's sun and from the great central sun at the center of the cosmos. The current radiated was totally pure. Crystalline frequencies composed the material of this invisible dome of energy. This grid of crystalline magnetic energy was used to power Atlantis. It also formed a grid equivalent to our electricity system today. Atlanteans used crystals as plugs to draw their energy requirements. Smaller crystals were used by individuals and in homes to connect to the larger pyramid crystals. Crystals drew on the force from the crystalline grid for lighting, heating, and power. They also stored energy that could be drawn upon later. The Great Crystal was an interdimensional portal that acted like a highway into the cosmos. It connected the high priests and priestesses of Atlantis to stars and star systems. Through meditation, they projected their consciousness into the stars and star systems for the purpose of learning from these light systems and assisting in the creation of civilization on Earth. Each of the regions of Atlantis were linked to the Great Crystal and each other by ley lines, which were like major roadways. Atlanteans used their crystals also for healing and in ceremony. The crystals were programmed to help plants grow. This programming drew from the frequency and power of the energy dome. In the words of Edgar Cayce, in the mineral kingdom, elements form a closer union with one another, and it is here that they make compounds for healing. Generator crystals were also used for teleportation and allowed Atlanteans to move through time and space and rematerialize somewhere else. The Atlanteans were only able to use these crystals by maintaining their pure, high vibration. The Atlanteans inherently understood that crystals have a consciousness. They're able to communicate with each other and with us. They have the ability to store and transfer energy over great distances and to transmit energy from source. The wisdom of our Atlantean ancestors lives within us. We are the reincarnated ones. We have chosen to be here at this time to remember this ancient wisdom and to use it to help heal ourselves and each other during this pivotal time on Earth. This marks the end of our Atlantean Healing Part 1 Masterclass. Let's take a look ahead at the Atlantean Healing Part 2 Masterclass. In this Masterclass, we will continue exploring the root race theory, specifically the root races 4 through 7 that begin with the Atlanteans, as well as energy healing, including both crystal healing and chakra healing, from the perspective of the Atlanteans, and the ways that Atlanteans used numerology, astrology, and the psychic arts for healing, as well as their specific tools for mental body healing. This masterclass is part of a 6-part masterclass series that includes the roots of Lemurian healing, Atlantean healing practices, ancient Egyptian healing, curanderos and shamans, Celtic healing practices, and the miracles of Jesus Christ.